Thank you, everybody, for coming along to this session this afternoon. I've been asked to present a sort of focused keynote around the subject of personalized learning, really as a warm-up act for the much more intelligent people that follow me in the discussion. So what I thought I would do is briefly go through some of the historical aspects of personal learning, because I think it's a little bit of an interesting history. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my concerns about the current obsession with things like big data and learning analytics and so forth. I should point out before any of this actually is I'm not anti-technology at all. I've made my career, in fact, from using technology in a variety of industries, including the music industry, the feature film industry, and video games, and have been working in the sort of with many of the people at the vanguard of transformation in education with technology for a very long time. I do, however, have some concerns, and I've got to the point now, maybe it's just because I'm getting on a bit, where we might want to tap the brakes. So bear that in mind as I go through this. I'm going to be critical, but that doesn't mean I'm anti. So tailored or Taylorized will understand in a little bit. I made this little video before I came out, and we're just going to start with a couple of videos which will give my voice a little break because it's a bit sore.
Orange, peace, happy, joy, fun, because I do not work as hard as King is beautiful. Everyone is together, because morality ought never, in any circumstances, to be rational. Orange, peace, work, happiness. Open your eyes. Wake up.
So it's an artistic interpretation by Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, which I'm sure you knew. And I think it's interesting, actually, in the digital age, and particularly over the last recent years and the sort of Edward Snowden revelations, that we were, I think, beginning to think that we were facing an Orwellian future, George Orwell. But I would argue that, in fact, we're not. George Orwell was predicting a communist dystopia, and of course that was something that was very much promoted in the sort of late 50s, early 60s with the concern of the spread of Soviet communism. But in reality, it was Huxley who actually had a differing perspective of a capitalist dystopia. The difference being is Orwell was saying what we fear will ruin us, and Huxley was saying that what we love will ruin us. And I'm going to develop that theme around the distraction economy as we move through this conversation. And you can draw your own parallels and decide whether we're looking at an Orwellian present and future or a Huxleyan present and future. Before we kick into this, is think about what the purpose of education is. And I've got an excerpt here from an interview with Noam Chomsky that appears in the Learning Reimagined book.
Well, we can ask ourselves what the purpose of an educational system is. And of course, there are sharp differences on this matter. There's the traditional an interpretation that comes from the Enlightenment, which holds that the highest goal in life is to inquire and create, to search the riches of the past, try to internalize the parts of them that are significant to you, carry that quest for understanding further in your own way. Purpose of education, from that point of view, is just to help people determine how to learn on their own. It's you, the learner, who is going to achieve in the course of education. And it's really up to you what you'll master, where you'll go, how you'll use it, how you'll go on to produce something new and exciting for yourself, maybe for others. That's one concept of education. The other concept is essentially indoctrination. People have the idea that from childhood, young people have to be placed into a framework in which they'll follow orders, accept existing frameworks, not challenge, and so on. And this is often quite explicit.
So Chomsky there presents us with what many might consider as a sort of false dichotomy. Education as a way of achieving personal enlightenment. You know, what is the child interested in and following their own line of inquiry? Where the extreme opposite of that is the state control or corporate control of inculcating the child with certain ideas and values. And of course, I would imagine, and Chomsky, in fact, as a young boy in the 1920s, attended a sort of progressive school, as it was called at the time, around John Dewey traditions. And a lot of the conversations that we're going to be having this afternoon go all the way back to 1902 and John Dewey. And if you haven't read The Child in the Curriculum, you can get it free and you can download it from the Gutenberg Project and so on. And it really is well worth reading. Because so much of the debate that we're having today in the world of when we talk about transformation and technology and all that stuff, and I think technology is a red herring, actually, was discussed by John Dewey. And this is an excerpt from The Child in the Curriculum, where he draws attention to this false dichotomy of the one school of thought that fixes on this curriculum and subject matter as a driver of the delivery system of education and the outcome, how we measure it, versus this notion of self-realization of the child, understanding who they are and what they love. So this is not a new conversation, and this has been interpreted in the personalized learning debate over the last century and indeed into this one, and I'm sure it will continue. So there's a number of theorists, and I haven't got time to go through all of them, but that have tackled what we mean by personalized learning. I mean, I think we all probably have different interpretations of what that means. So let me go through some of the ones of the past, just very briefly. So, we had Helen Parkhurst, the Dalton Project. This was the student programming the curriculum in order to meet the needs, interests, and abilities, to promote independence and dependability. Washburn, programmed instruction, self-governance. It was sort of programmed instruction, the attempt to expand educational focus of creative activities, emotional and social development. Claparède in L'École sur Mesure, sorry for the French out there with my appalling accent. In 1920, he stated that the school child should have the opportunity to freely choose a series of activities already predisposed by the teacher to improve intellectual, social, moral growth and develop personality. Bloom, of course, Benjamin Bloom, the mastery of learning is in the 1960s, the instructional method that presumes all children can learn if they're provided with the appropriate learning conditions. Fred Keller, with a personalized system of instruction, this personalized system of instruction was kind of fit slightly into the notion of social constructivism by requiring students to work in teams of peer support with a proctor answering questions. And this has been re-engaged by Siddhartha Mitra, for example, today in his self-organized learning environments. Howard Gardner, the theory of multiple intelligences, that we have multiple intelligences and some are more developed than others. We learn in new ways. Many attempts today, I in fact read as I left London that these theories are being discredited. Apparently we all learn the same and direct instruction is the only way that we learn according to the evidence. And let's remember that evidence-based practice and the talk around that is another fad, much like some of these issues. And of course, evidence-based practice is a slogan to refute rhetorical opposition. Haas, the first one that coined the term personalization, It's un-British. In the context of educational science, I mean, he was one that really termed the word personalization back in a book published in 1981. Kilpatrick and the project method, child-centered, problem solving, again, rooted in the Dewey tradition. And many of the schools I visited in my book that were really, I mean, and actually everywhere, I mean, not in one place. I mean, I found it in San Diego, I found it in Beijing, I found it in Lebanon, I found it in Jordan, were all using Dewey-based principles for problem solving and project-based learning, where they were de-siloing and decoupling subjects, and the nature of creating something, and therefore learning the things you needed to create that thing were the key things that were being mentioned over and over again. So it's like moving on. So this chap, David Miliband, you might have heard of his brother, Ed, who now is the leader of the Labour Party. David and Ed had a bit of an argument about who would be the leader of the Labour Party, and David lost, which is unfortunate. So he described it this way in 2004 in a speech, that personalised learning is that, well, you can read this. I mean, the real key thing here is that he said it's different from what he called individualised learning, where kids sit alone in front of a computer, or just left on their own to sort of go off and just discover willy-nilly. And I think there's a key distinction there. So I thought this is quite interesting. I would go and have a look at the UK government Department for Education to see what it said about personalised learning today. And this is what I found. So, I mean, so you all know, whichever country you're from, you all know education's a political football, don't you? I mean, as soon as you change the party or the leader or whatever, suddenly, we're going to ditch all that stuff. And now in the UK, we're in the kind of back to basics, do you know what I mean? Learn by rote, get the kids through the test, let's do well on PISA, the unelected Olympic Committee of Education. So I looked it up on the web, on Google, and I found this, which is interesting. I mean, I agree with the first bit, and then I thought, there's this funny bit that's been put on the end. Typically, technology is used to facilitate personalised learning environments. Well, I bet John Dewey never saw that coming. And then I saw this in the newspaper from one of our UK government ministers. I mean, I'm sorry this is UK-based, but this bit anyway. But I thought I'm sure you have your own issues in your own countries, certainly from the conversations I've had. And this is the front page of a newspaper sold in the city, where we steal the money. And he was, it was basically the end of teaching. Apparently teachers can take a back seat in imparting knowledge, and I'm not quite sure what he expected them to do after that, but it's something to do with the sort of human soft stuff, I don't know. But I thought it was quite shocking, really, this idea that we now don't need teachers. And I also think it showed a shocking misunderstanding of what teaching and learning actually is. This sort of idea that it was a factory process. So we now come to the sort of technical bit, actually, of my talk. So we're in this age of ubiquitous invisible computing. Now, back in the late 90s, where I lost an enormous amount of money, it was a dot-com boom. And during that time, we were, Silicon Valley to the UK, everywhere else, all the techie guys, and I was one of those, I'm afraid, all had this idea of, sensors in everything, even inside our body, that would be reporting back lots of data. At the time, in the late 90s and early noughties, we were ahead of our time, really, and the costs of doing that were impossible. The economies of scale, of course, have now changed. With the advent of firms like Google and Facebook, Amazon, we've entered the world of networked capitalism. Network capitalism, the currency of network capitalism, the oil, if you like, is data. It's why, for example, WhatsApp was worth $19 billion. I think only about 19 employees, and that's incredible. I mean, you could have provided water and sanitation for every single person on the planet for $19 billion. But it was the value of the data, and that's the currency in this networked capitalism. So what we have is enormous number of little devices, and we're going to have more. You'll hear a lot about the Internet of Things. Apparently that's the next big thing that we're all supposed to embrace. And what's happening is we've gone from smartphones that help us to smaller devices, wearable devices. And that's fine, and eventually visible devices. Everyone from Silicon Valley will say, yes, well, it will work, and people even in tech will say it'll work when it's invisible. I'm very worried about that. I don't think that's a utopia, because when we're holding a phone, we're at least aware of some of the discussions that are going on digitally, because there's countless discussions that are going on digitally now, which we're not involved with because we slow it down. For example, if I want to ship a parcel from Doha to London, I have to leave a number of computer systems to have that conversation. And as that technology becomes more and more visible, we effectively allow these conversations to happen without our knowledge, because we place ourselves in the care of the technology. And we're going to come back to that in just a second. I mean, in many ways, if we look at history, we talk about the Industrial Revolution, but it was a railroad where we actually saw the impacts. It changed the way we distribute products, and society, and where we place factories. And society shaped itself. And I'm not talking about technological determinism here, because I don't believe in that. What I'm saying is society will become characterized, it will shape itself around the prevalent systems. And so that's why factories were where they were and so forth. And then the same happened with the electric grid, which also then changed our notion of entertainment and family and communications. And in the same way, the digital world now, we begin to shape ourselves around this. Things are digitized in such a way, and the conversations are hidden so that we're not necessarily aware of what's going on. And it's what we miss, because in order to shape ourselves, we accept that certain parts of that dialogue are no longer being quantified. So big data, everything counts in large amounts. And this is why Google, for example, wanted to move into Android. It wasn't that they had a fetish for phones, it was because it gives us more data points. We are leaking data, an incredible amount of it. And I'm not really worried, I'm not really talking about privacy and so forth. I'm just talking about the value of big data and the belief that big data can tell us and quantify everything about the human condition. This was another quote from the same government minister that said that teaching was dead. He was telling us about the big data, and that with the big data, they can use an algorithm that takes that data and works out how each child could learn more. I'm horrified by this because it's reductive. It's like Silicon Valley. It's incredible reductionist thinking that you can take the teaching and learning process and convert that to a series of noughts and ones to determine what a child needs to learn. The problem with big data is that it tells us about the what. It doesn't tell us about the why. And I think this is an important issue. Teachers, the human interface, consider more about the why, or at least they do if authorities allow them to, and stop measuring them. And we're going to come back to measurement in a second. Frederick Taylor was a guru, I've heard that word twice today, for manufacturing, this thing of the scientific method. His methods were based in plantation slavery. And the idea was to transform craft production into mass production so we could get greater efficiencies from our plantations, greater efficiencies from our factories. He was the first proponent, in fact, in 1911 of big data. He collected data from the production line, whether that was a slave farm or whether this was a factory, and fed that data back to the management so they could make decisions. And this would allow us to remove craft, the specialism, from a manufacturing or production line. And what I fear is that if we're not careful with some of these technologies, we're going to see this reoccur with algorithms and big data. Now, the issue here is this thing called algorithmic bias. And what I'm saying is that the software engineers that write these algorithms are just the same as the people that write your newspapers. They have biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious. They are imbued within the code that's being written. Google, for example, will write code that is focused around advertising. So there are biases. It's how Facebook, for example, could change how we felt emotionally by playing with our Facebook feeds without us knowing. So imagine if they can do that, what could they do? What could a company do in terms of democracy? What could they do in terms of consciousness? What could they do in terms of popular opinion through education if we don't know what those proprietary algorithms do? And this gentleman, Evgeny Morozov, a technology critic, has this message. He says that technology, whether we like it or not, is political. And we must scrutinize technology decisions in the same way that we should scrutinize decisions around politics. Ken Robinson, in the Learning Reimagined book says this.
That's what I always say, that teaching is an art form. It's not a delivery system. I don't know when we start confusing teaching with FedEx. You know, it's a way of, you know, teaching is an art. It's an arts practice. It's about connoisseurship and judgment and intuition. And we all remember the great teachers in our lives, the ones who kind of woke us up and that we're still thinking about because they said something to us or they gave us an angle on something that we've never forgotten.
So teaching is not a delivery system. And I think we're seeing a lot of this thinking at the moment about teaching and learning being a delivery. For me, this is what I say. I wouldn't trust an algorithm to do that. Thank you very much for your time.